Okay, so we're going to talk about visual supports and how they can help kids with autism and other developmental disabilities. Visual supports are something we all use. We use them every day, either by writing things down on a calendar or using your phone or, writing notes, grocery lists, all kinds of things. We make things visual by writing them down. And we know for kids with autism specifically that visual supports help. But again, it's not something just for kids with autism. All kinds of people benefit from supports. And a lot of times our kids with autism and developmental disabilities also benefit by having pictures. So I'm going to show you some examples, and we're going to kind of talk about the visual supports that we can use for kids. So a key component in ensuring that students with autism understand the environment and experience the environment in a structured way is through the use of visual supports. And research indicates that students that have autism or Asperger's syndrome have a difficult time attending to, modulating, or understanding the environment or auditory input. And the ability to process the information also sometimes results in non-engaged behavior, where kids are not engaged in what they should be doing. And so we know by putting visual supports in place, kids prefer these because it allows it to be predictable and much more invariant and predictable than auditory information is. So there's different types of visual supports, and we can look at all different types of them. Sometimes the visual support has to do with the environmental arrangement. So like being able to have specific seating, environmental prints or labels, clear boundaries. For some of our kids at the Center for Autism, we have different areas of the classroom that they can go and different areas that they can't go. Specifically, we don't want the kids walking behind the teacher's desk. Like that's kind of the teacher's personal space. And so instead of constantly saying, Joey, get away from my desk, Joey, get away from my desk, we use blue tape everywhere. So like anywhere in the hallway, if they're not supposed to go into a certain area or behind the desk, we just put blue tape on the floor. So we're making these visual boundaries. And most of the kids have now learned, if they're not, they're learning it right now, that you don't go across the blue tape, that's an area that you're not allowed to go. And so just making some of these boundaries with tape, with pictures, with visuals, being able to have a picture that shows that this is the next work task that you have to do. All of those things can be very helpful for kids. We can also have visuals for routines and transitions, so that would be schedules. We can also have a schedule within a schedule. Transition cards, helping kids recognize like when it's time to go from one place to the next. Also communicating expectations. So we can have visual supports that help with communication, whether that's a program with the iPad to be able to communicate expressively by indicating I want this, or you guys might be familiar with a PEC system. It's Picture Exchange Communication System, where kids can exchange a picture and the pictures represent, I want a cookie or I want to take a break or those kinds of things. And then we can also have like some self-monitoring where kids can use things like break cards and we can have those visual for them to be able to prompt that language to ask for them. So majority of students with autism use vision as their primary modality, and we use this to our advantage by using these visual supports. And organizing the environment in a way that uses these visual supports oftentimes leads to the most independence. So this is a way that kids then can become much more independent. And it prevents the staff from making assumptions about what might be happening or what the student might need or want. And I think sometimes, even in some of the training that I've been in, they've indicated, and I think it makes sense, that oftentimes with kids with autism, we overestimate their ability to understand language, because just hearing language is oftentimes difficult for them to comprehend. They need to see it. And so it keeps us from making an assumption that they understand, because a picture is a permanent product that we can continue to show, or a word, whatever, something written down can be very helpful. So we want to look at different things that allow for visual continuity. And so these are some very interesting examples. These are actually from another behavior analyst that I teach a class with at UMSL, at University of Missouri, St. Louis. And she had given these examples that we now both use in our training on helping people understand visual supports, because oftentimes when we look at these visual supports, there's a difference between a staff-imposed strategy and a student-imposed strategy. So usually the adult is the one coming up with the visual strategies, but you have to recognize that may or may not be what's actually helpful for the student. So we have 3 kids, Alicia, Jack, and Kelly, and these 3 students, the teacher put a visual support in place that did not work, and after some time realized that when the student was more involved in coming up with the visual support, then that was more helpful. So visual continuity, this was staff imposed for Alicia, and this didn't work. So you'll see basically what they were looking at is that in the classroom there was a blue card, and the blue card said cafeteria. And the blue card then had to go to the cafeteria where there was another blue card. And so the idea was she was matching the blue card on her schedule to the blue card in the cafeteria. We were trying to help her understand that this is your schedule, so this is where you need to go. The green card represented recess, so she has the green card on her schedule. I'm supposed to go to recess. She wasn't getting it. She wasn't following that. She was lower cognitively and having trouble. So we have these different colors for her to get from one point to the next. You'll notice on this one when we did a map and visually laid out the colors as a map, so you can see like the yellow going all the way to the cafeteria or the green going to recess, that's what finally worked. She needed to see the entire map and the path as opposed to just taking one card to the next. So what the staff tried to put in place didn't work. When we tried another thing that we felt like was kind of coming from some of the things that she was showing us to be successful, we were able to come up with a strategy that worked for her to help make those transitions and use a visual schedule independently. This is my favorite one. This is Jack for his morning routine. And this is a particular student who absolutely loved to type on the computer in all the different fonts, right? So he would type something and he would he'd type one line and then he'd change it to a different font. And so we knew that that was something that he really liked to do and thought maybe if we use different fonts, it will help motivate him to follow a direction. And so you can see we have his morning routine where he has to wake up and go to the bathroom and shower, dry yourself, shave, all these different things. Like we wanted him to be able to do this independently. And he kept pushing it away. He didn't like it. He didn't want to use it. He was frustrated with it. Then we realized that the reason that he didn't like the schedule is because the way that he changed the fonts anytime we was on the computer was that they had to be in the order that are listed on the computer. So in other words, the order of the font on the computer. So the first one is Arial and then Agency and then Algerian and all these different ones. They had to be in that same order because he always had the fonts in the same order. The first one had to be the first thing on the schedule. The second one had to be the second thing on the schedule. Then all of a sudden he loved it and he followed it and he was completely independent. So we kind of learned that by trial and error. And this other continuity was for a student, Kelly, with the visual continuity. So she was a middle school student and she was always getting on her phone. We wanted to teach her, okay, you cannot be talking on your phone during this time. So we have this visual with the phone and then the phone with the X through it to say you cannot have the phone. She didn't understand that. When we changed it to someone talking on the phone, and you can see the picture here has the person talking on the phone and then the person talking on the phone with the line through it, then she understood because it wasn't just the phone, it was talking on the phone that she was having trouble with, and that allowed her to really be more successful. So when we put staff-imposed visual strategies in place, they're fine, but if they're not working, don't just assume that that visual didn't work, but maybe there's some other components that you could put in place that might be helpful for a student. So some additional examples. One of the things that we can use is a first then. This is a very simple visual where you can basically have you have the 2 cards here and it says first you do this and then you do this. And so the one picture under first has the writing task and the next one has a picture of music. So the basic idea is to visually show the child that first you write and then you get to listen to your music. So that first then can be a very helpful behavior strategy and visual strategy to just get understanding the expectation for just one thing. One of my webinars is on behavior mapping, and we certainly have a lot more opportunities to make different choices with different paths. For some kids, that's too complicated for them and they need it very simple like this. Another one to talk about is schedules. So we really want to have a lot of visual schedules in place for kids that just predict what's going to be happening for them next in the day. And it could be something like something that shows a picture that math, and then after math is reading. So sometimes it can be pictures, sometimes it can just be words. But the idea is that we want to have these schedules in place to be able to help predict for kids. So an example, I was doing a consultation for this first grader. It was in a little bitty small school district, and the special ed director was also the speech language pathologist. Sometimes people in very small districts share these roles. So I got there before the director was there because she had a meeting that morning. So I went ahead and went into the classroom. I sat down, I was observing this little girl in her first grade classroom. And the special ed director comes down. She just wanted to touch base with me to see if everything was going okay. But when she walked into the classroom, what do you think the first grader thought? Oh, it's time for speech. So she's getting up and she's like, oh, great, it's time for speech. And she's trying to go with the special ed director because anytime she walked in the room, she always went to speech. And usually the sped director said whenever she did speech really well, she got like a prize out of the treasure box. And so she was very excited about it. And so they kept saying, no, Susie, it's not time yet. No, Susie, it's not time yet. And so I was able to give them an example. This is my first recommendation. She needs a visual schedule. You need to be able to refer to pictures that says, okay, let's look at this picture. Right now it's time for math. Next, we're doing science, then lunch, then recess, and then Mrs. Smith is coming in to do speech. So instead of just using words to say, no, that's not now, and all that kind of thing, you just refer to the sequence of pictures, and that can be very helpful for kids. So it can be in the form of pictures or words or checklist. Couple things to know about schedules. One of the things we talk about is to pre-Mac a schedule. So what does that mean? Pre-Mac is from a man named David Pre-Mac, and some people also refer to this as Grandma's Law. And basically the idea is that if you eat all your broccoli, then you get the chocolate chip cookie. So you want to do a non-preferred task and make sure it's always followed by a preferred task. So you don't want to have a schedule that says here's math and then it's social studies and you don't like either of them. You want to have math followed by a preferred task and then social studies followed by another preferred task. So I'm going to be looking at a visual schedule, making sure that it's pre-macked so that we know that there's reinforcement or preferred activities. One of the things is it makes it very easy to use the as soon as statement I've talked about in the past. As soon as you do this work, you can take a break. But it also helps because when you're using the visual schedule and you can have these contingencies or these as soon as you can do this and this comes next, then you're able to help predict for the child how they're able to get reinforcement. And what the research shows is that when you pair something non-preferred with something preferred, the non-preferred thing becomes a little bit better. And so all of that kind of goes along into that research. Another thing to remember with some kids with autism or other developmental disabilities with visual schedules is that you want to make sure that you show the whole day or at least the morning and the afternoon so that kids don't think as soon as the schedule's finished, the day is over. And you also sometimes need to do schedules within a schedule. So you might have a schedule that says OT. And what I saw in my building, my classroom teacher would have the schedule and it would say occupational therapy or OT. The kids would go down to occupational therapy and then she would have what we would call a schedule within a schedule. So she'd have on a little dry erase board, we're going to do 1, 2, 3, and 4. So they could see exactly. So again, we're making everything very, very visual. The last little piece about schedules to remember is, especially for our kids with autism, we want to use them as a way to teach change and to help with flexibility. A lot of times our kids with autism don't like change. Like they have a really hard time when you're supposed to go out to recess and it's raining because there has to be a change. Or sometimes I've had kids that, they want to show up to school on Memorial Day or whatever day because you're supposed to be in school on Mondays, but it's a holiday and they have a hard time with that. So we want to teach kids to be able to practice handling a change. So that might mean that I have a visual schedule, and when there's a change, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the visual schedule, like maybe the one here with pictures. I'm going to say, oh, today we're not going outside for recess because we're having an assembly. So I'm going to take one picture off and put the new picture in. I'm going to do that with the child so they can experience that and see that change. Sometimes on a schedule, I might have a schedule where I put a star somewhere, and all the kids know is that star means something's going to change. So we're going to practice that. I was in a workshop where the presenter talked about this 50-year-old man who had been working at a sheltered workshop his whole life. He lived with his mom, and there was a day his mom took him to work every day, and this day that he attacked his mom in the car, and she had a car accident, and he had never been aggressive a day in his life. And they were trying to figure out what was going on and whether mom could still take care of him because she was getting older. Well, what they realized is that mom had taken him to the sheltered workshop the same way every day for 20 years, and she had never deviated from that schedule. She didn't even think about it. She's driving. For whatever reason, there was some construction and she had to take a detour. So she took a left instead of a right. He couldn't handle the change because no one had ever taught him how to handle the change. So he became aggressive, even though that wasn't typically the kind of behavior that he had. So we have to make sure that we practice changes and teach kids how to make some of these changes and handle some of these things, because life involves changes. We want the structure and the routine, but we also want to systematically teach it so kids can be successful. So schedules will also depend on age and skills. So like this one, go to room 401, and then you go to science, and it says follow the agenda 1, 2, 3. So that kind of shows you that schedule within a schedule that's showing you how these are the 3 things that need to happen in that schedule. We can also have checklists or lists that kind of tell kids what they're supposed to be doing. This particular one looks at school rules. So we have a student that he needs to keep his hands to himself and be quiet, listen to the teacher, finish his work, and speak appropriately. So again, instead of just saying, Joey, you need to be quiet, Joey, you need to get your work finished, we've got this visual. We've got a picture here that shows exactly what he needs to do. And this one is paired with pictures and words. So hopefully this student is starting to learn to read, but we still have the picture there to cue him to know what the rules and expectations are for this classroom. Sometimes as well, as opposed to just rules, I might have what we call a task analysis, right? So we have basically all the steps that you need to do to wash your hands. I'll have kids that go in the bathroom and I want them to wash their hands, and they turn the water on and then get the paper towel. So they miss the whole sequence of you get soap, you wash your hands, you rinse them. So instead of verbally saying, don't forget the soap, okay, rinse your hands, okay, get the paper towel, I have a visual, and it's a step-by-step that has a picture of this is what you do first, and then I can point to the next one, and this is what you do next, and I can give them those sequence so that they can learn to be independent by using those skills and washing their hands independently in the bathroom, and they don't need to be, they don't become prompt dependent and have all of these prompts with them. Another good visual cue is to use timers. Timers can help predict how long something's going to last, especially when you're doing preferred activities. Like you're saying, this is how much math you have to do. It would be a work activity, but for a preferred activity, how much time you get to be on the computer. We want to have a visual of some sort, or even the auditory timer that goes off to say, this is when you have to stop the activity. Now you'll notice in these are called time timers, and you'll see as you set the timer, the amount of time that goes by or that's set turns red, and as the time elapses, that red disappears. So you can see if it's set for 20 minutes, as the 20 minutes goes by, the red gets smaller and smaller and smaller, so kids can visually see time moving. And that can be helpful, especially for kids that don't really understand a digital timer, although they're great too. I mean, we have lots of those, but anytime you need to make transitions, I would always do that with a timer. We have a place next to the Center for Autism. There's a dollar store that's not too far, and they make these timers. We go through them like crazy because they get tossed or whatever, and so every time they get a shipment in, we buy 20 $1 timers and throw them in a drawer up in the office, because you can't do what we do without a timer. And so if someone's doesn't have a timer, they can go grab one very easily. So make sure if you buy them, you buy plenty of them, because sometimes they easily get dropped and stuff like that. The other kind of a visual system we can use is what's called a token system. And so this is where kids can earn tokens to get a bigger reinforcer. So it might be 5 pennies, it might be 5 stickers. You'll see in this one, this is a student that really likes trains. So the actual tokens are pictures of trains, and when he earns 5 of them, he gets to look at his train book. So we're using lots of reinforcers and lots of motivation throughout the whole thing. So his rules say he should be quiet with no blurting out and using nice words. He needs 5 tokens, and then he can have his break with his train book. Now, sometimes you might say, oh gosh, that'd be hard for one of my kids to earn 5 tokens. You can start these token boards like this, and you can have all of them on there but one, like it is right now. So maybe this is the token board that you present, and you say, okay, we have to earn 1 train, and when you earn the train, then you can look at your train book. And so they can see that visual, and then the next time they have to earn 2, and the next time they have to earn 3. So you work up to being able to earn more and more of these tokens. And there's lots of creative ways you can do it. I have had kids that spell the word computer or spell the word free time. I had this little guy who loved the Dukes of Hazzard. That was his favorite. And so he loved everything that had to do with it. We took a picture of the General Lee, which was the car that they drove in the Dukes of Hazzard, and we laminated it and cut it up into 6 pieces, each with Velcro. So then every time he earned something, he got to put a piece of that on there until it made the General Lee. And then that was his way of being able to exchange it for his reinforcement. And that was really motivating for him because he loved everything that had to do with the Dukes of Hazzard. So I've had kids that we used pennies and we've used stickers and different kinds of things, lots of different ways to increase motivation. Just know that reinforcement needs to occur quickly in order to change behavior. So a lot of times I see people like, let's do a token system where kids have to do 5 things before they get reinforcement. Sometimes that's too much for kids. Sometimes they need to start with a smaller number of things to do. So again, whether they only just earn 1 token and 2 tokens, make sure that you're always getting that reinforcement so that it happens often enough that we're seeing changes in behavior, more good behavior because of that reinforcement. We also can have different things like behavior charts, incentive sheets. So this one shows first hour, second hour, third hour, and it's got the different things for him to look at, like is he listening, following directions, those kinds of things. And then it just says yes or no. So the behavior sheet at the end of the first part of the day circles yes or no whether or not those behaviors occurred, and then based on the number of points he gets his half day reinforcer, and then at the end of the day he gets his end of the day reinforcer. And so this can be a really good incentive, but notice how it's got the pictures on there and it makes it very visual, which can be very motivating for kids. Other kinds of things with self-management, so teaching kids how to work through coping skills and some of those kinds of things. So this is a particular student. It says first take a deep breath, count to 10, raise my hand, ask Mr. M for help, and then I get a break. So giving him those tools instead of just saying use your coping skills. Again, we have it visual, step by step. These are the things that you need to do. These things can sometimes work remarkably well with kids by just getting things written down and adding pictures. We can teach kids to ask for breaks, and there are 3 different types of breaks. We can have a break that's scheduled throughout the day. So you can have on the schedule, a morning break and an afternoon break. You can have it more often than that. You can also have teacher-initiated breaks, like you can see that a child is starting to come up with, they're starting to get dysregulated, they're having some difficulty, they're feeling stressed, they're starting to write really hard with their pencil and their eyebrows are squished up. You can tell they're getting frustrated. You might initiate a break at that time. Or you can also have students initiate a break where they have a place on their desk where they can say break please, and they can point to the picture, they can sign break, they can say break, some way that they can initiate that I need a break. The one thing I want you to be very careful of with breaks, because they're great to teach kids that skill, to be able to say I need a break right now, but you need to make sure that you're not unintentionally or accidentally reinforcing behavior. In other words, here's some math. Oh, now I need a break. Well, do they really need a break, or is that their way of getting out of the math? So sometimes what I might do is I'll say, oh, nice job asking for a break. I want you to do 1 math problem and then you can take a break. And I might build on that. But you need to be very careful that you don't initiate a teacher break when kids are getting frustrated. I worked with a classroom, and this little girl loved to go to the sensory room. There was a swing and scooter boards, and so I noticed every time they asked her to do work, she started screaming, and they took her to the sensory room. I was like, what are you guys? How are you guys implementing this plan? Well, when she gets upset, she needs sensory, okay? But she only needed sensory right before they asked her to do something, and they're like, yeah, but we went to a training and knew that we needed to add sensory stuff. Exactly, you use it preventatively ahead of time, where you can use sensory strategies. You can use it as reinforcement. As soon as you get your work finished, you can go to the sensory room if that's something that's fun and exciting to that child. Use it as reinforcement. Use it as a way to increase the likelihood that behavior is going to occur by using it as a reinforcer. And that can oftentimes be very helpful for kids. You just have to make sure that they don't learn that that's a way for them to get out of things. Social stories, we've talked about that a little bit with different visual supports, and these are stories that we try and really help the child understand an area where they might be having some difficulty and how they can make changes in that environment by having an appropriate response or something. So again, social stories are Carol Gray. They're from the Gray Center. I have an example here. I'm just going to read it to you while you look at it. And this is pretend examples in schoolwork. This was a student that we had that was having trouble. So my name is Dylan. I go to Franklin School. Sometimes I may have an assignment in math. I may have story problems. To do a story problem, children have to pretend. Pretend means it might not be true in terms of what I usually say or do. Pretending means using our intelligence to imagine what we would do to solve the problem. This may mean we pretend to like foods that we really don't like in real life, or we pretend to like things or activities that we really don't like. The good news about pretending is that I won't ever have to really like that or eat those foods or really like those things. I will try to pretend enough so that I can complete my work. I can try to tell myself that to complete my work, I only have to pretend for a short time. So what is this about? This was a kid that was doing math problems, story problems, or word problems with math, and you know how those are in the beginning. You have 2 apples. Susie has 3 apples. How many apples are there altogether? Well, this kid with autism, I don't like apples. And so he would get all upset because he didn't like apples and he didn't want apples and he doesn't eat apples and he hates them. So he wasn't doing the math because he wasn't able to pretend that he might have an apple and his friend might have an apple. So, it sounds like something very minor, but for him, it was affecting his ability to do his math. So we do a social story to help him understand what the expectations are, why there might be some confusion, what you can do. I don't have to pretend a long time, just a short period of time. I will never have to really eat an apple, and those kinds of things can be beneficial. The other one I'm going to show you is a power card. Power cards use a reinforcing character along with a set of rules that help kids understand what the expectations are. So here's SpongeBob, and he's one cool guy. I'm going to read this one as well. A lot of times you don't have quite this much text on there. I'll give you some examples. But SpongeBob goes to school along with his best friend, Patrick. There's a lot of great things to learn at school and time to spend with friends. Sometimes SpongeBob gets frustrated at school. The work can be hard at times, and things aren't always the way he wants them to be. When SpongeBob thinks, that's it, I'm out of here, he takes a short break. He goes to a safe place to calm down. SpongeBob never runs out of the building. He always uses the bathroom or an empty room. SpongeBob always tells an adult when he is going to take a break. So that's kind of like the little social story that you would do. The actual power card could be just on a simple index card, size card, with a picture of SpongeBob. And it can say just this: SpongeBob wants everyone to know that it's okay to take a break at school. He wants you to remember these rules. 1, take a break in the bathroom or an empty room. 2, never run outside of the classroom. And 3, tell an adult that you need a break before you leave. And so this is a really great way. I've had kids that, they really like, I had this little girl that loved Oscar the Grouch, and she was talking too loud in class. And so I had a little card, and it says, when you're finished with your work, Oscar the Grouch uses a quiet voice. And so she would read it out loud, but then she would use a quiet voice because Oscar the Grouch used a quiet voice, and that was something that was reinforcing. These are obviously probably not very age appropriate for middle school and high school kids, but for some of our kids, they can be very helpful because that reinforcing character helps to motivate them to use the appropriate behavior.